Now we're going to move on to item 8, comments from council members. First, we're going to start with Councilmember Mason. Item A is stronger governance, TSPC process update discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I agendized this because I attended the last TSPC committee meeting, and we've talked a lot about what does stronger governance look like at all levels within the city. And one of the areas that I realized at the TSPC and probably in other committees as well is that in this case there had been no process until recently around how to request a speed bump or traffic calming measures. And I believe maybe a year and a half ago, somebody said, well, the process is you go to public comment, you make a public comment, and then there was silence as to where that comment goes to or what happens. So staff has worked towards creating a process for traffic calming measure requests, which I thank staff for doing that. And this process resulted in the review of a couple of streets, and these the residents all went over the 50% of what was requested to petition the city to create a traffic calming measure. There was an engineer brought out to study it, and the results were, with the exception of one, which was Cunningham Way, and I agree wholeheartedly there needs to be some kind of traffic calming measures there. But the other streets were not recommended to have traffic calming measures. And so the committee, respectful to staff and to the process, was uncomfortable doing anything more to change that recommendation or to add anything without a change in the actual process. And so the reason I'm bringing this up tonight is because considering that this is a new process and considering that this has been a COVID year and that these studies were done during the COVID year when people were home, it seems that a wait for 3 years, which is the current process, is too extensive for the remaining 3 streets. And it may be 4, I apologize if I have the number wrong. But I think that's too long to wait, considering that it's very possible that those streets really do need speed bumps or traffic calming measures sooner than that. There were a number of residents who called in from those communities, some of which I think we have heard from at some point over the last couple of years. And so really, we may need Attorney Zaffarano. I'm sorry it's so late, but I think the conversation I wanted to have tonight was, can we ask that the process be reviewed? Can we review the process? Can we reconsider those 3 streets, given that we know for sure that schools weren't open yet when these were taken, at least our local schools? What's the purview of the council in this case?
City Attorney.
Sure. So there's a variety of questions there, and not sure exactly which one to start with. So I think starters, I think we don't want to confuse the process with the decision or with the merits of the decision. Mm-hmm. So if there's an independent reason to alter the process, that's certainly something that staff can look at and bring it back to a recommendation. Staff hasn't evaluated any of those alternatives prior to the meeting and prior to tonight's comment. At least I haven't. So we could certainly look at that if there's majority support by the council to do that. I think the substance of the decision is sort of entirely another matter and is not really related to the process. The substance on the merits was that there was a decision, and it was based apparently on the opinion of an engineer, a consulting engineer. So I don't know that the process is really related to that, to the dissatisfaction with that decision, except as it relates to when can the matter be brought back again. And I think that's what you were getting at.
I think that's fair. And I guess so currently the process is 3 years, and because it's new, I want to say I don't really know, to be really honest, if the request should be to actually change the process or to make an exception in how we could do that as a council in this regard, because we are aware that not everything was open at the time that the engineer took this information or did the study.
And I guess I see that the conference room has a hand up, but I just want to say about that, I haven't looked at the data. For example, and on the substance of it, I don't know whether the residents made their requests during COVID times. So if that were the case, then it perhaps wouldn't matter whether the study was done during COVID times, because presumably the two would match up. But that would be something that, we would need to look at.
Well, I will just say I know that two of the streets, those requests were made back in 2019, and they were made, and I brought them up at council, and I was told to inform them that the process was to go back and make a public comment. And then since then, this process has been created. So some of these requests have been ongoing before I was on the council, I'm sure. But I think the benefit is now there's a clear process.
City Manager.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Well, one comment and then a suggestion. So I believe it was talked about at the meeting, and this subject did come up in part. And one of the things that that staff relayed to me is that while there may be a desire to redo the analysis in a year, under the assumption that the analysis may be more favorable because it will be potentially a more normal traffic year, may not actually bear out. But one of the things that the traffic engineer said was that doing that analysis during COVID-19, when there's theoretically less traffic, may actually mean that people were going faster. And so if you redo the analysis when there's more traffic, people may actually be going slower. And so it may still be that the areas do not meet the threshold and may even be further away from the threshold when there is more traffic on the road. And so, but again, that was the traffic engineer's assessment, is that the thought that doing it in a year will be more preferential to meeting the threshold and getting traffic calming measures. In their professional opinion, it would actually be more likely be in reverse. However, should the City Council want to discuss this, it's worth reminding the City Council that at your very last meeting, the August 24th City Council meeting, we had a study session on your strategic initiatives. The City Council has an existing strategic initiative 24.5, which is to review the TSPC committee. That initiative is currently on hold because staff does not have the resources to work on that, and it's pending additional resources, but it is anticipated to start later this fiscal year. And the update that you were provided is that that initiative will be assigned to the permanent public works director and is anticipated to start in Q3 or Q4 of this fiscal year. So if the City Council would like to discuss potentially changing this practice or policy of the TSPC, or potentially having the TSPC re-review these 4 locations next year, potentially a way to do that is through your existing strategic initiative that you will talk about later this fiscal year. And again, that would be plenty of time to have that discussion if you want to have those streets reevaluated in a year or in 2 years, or wait the current policy cycle of 3 years.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilwoman Mason, for bringing this item up. I did listen in on that TSPC meeting. There were 4 streets that did not qualify, and the basis of that qualification is the 85 percentile speed. And City Manager Grogan is correct, and our consultant mentioned that it probably wouldn't be favorable to do those readings again based on the current toolkits, the basis of that being the 85 percentile. That he also mentioned something about being able to modify the increment of the speed, and also to provide some leeway and some discretion based on the width of the street and the location of the street, if it was near a school and other things. So I think the TSPC did the right thing based on the current conditions. They said they couldn't support it, and they went along with the recommendation, but they were interested in what you mentioned about the 3-year requirement. Seemed a little heavy, but the way to get something changed there is to change the requirements in the toolkit, and it sounded like at the end of there that that's the direction that they wanted to go, and I am in support of that. And if we need to have a discussion about that, then we do have the initiatives, and as that comes around, we can address that. But the main thing that I was hoping to see through that toolkit is if there's, once they obtain the data of the speeding at a certain time and they have that locked in, that it would be nice that if the police were available to kind of go by during that speeding time and to issue a couple of tickets, that's generally the quickest way for people to stop speeding. So thank you.
Any other comments from colleagues? Councilmember Mason.
Yeah, I'm okay with waiting because that's still within the year for the initiatives. And you know, in all honesty, I don't even know that I'm opposed to the 3-year wait, because in any regular year, it's going to be an additional expense for similar traffic, right? This year, though, the reason I am advocating for this to be reviewed again is I do think it's an unconventional year. It was expressed through practically the entire TSPC. And I think we need to give them the ability to request the review, or us request the review. And if it ends up being the same, then it ends up being the same. But I think there's a lot of peace of mind that's associated with the streets that your kids run on. And we want to make sure we rule out any excuse or any outlier that may otherwise in any given year not be an issue. So I think that's it for me.
Okay, so at this time, as the manager said, there's strategic initiatives, and we can address it at that time. So with all okay, then I'm going to move on to this next item for Councilmember Mason, which is item B, local purchasing policy.
Yeah, so we had a meeting about, we talked about a strategic initiative of a local purchasing policy in the 2020 strategic initiative review. And at that time, the city manager asked us to hold off until we have an opportunity to listen to a presentation by the staff on what's currently being done to prioritize local purchasing. And then around that time, we lost Keith, who was working on the project. And so I'm just trying to figure out where we are with it. Is this something that should be requested again as an initiative, or will we be receiving an update at some point soon? And I know with the business plan and the RAC, I think one of the areas that would be of interest would be seeing if we could ensure that the catering list one is required, and 2 comes from local restaurants. And so as time moves on, I am curious to know where we are with this local purchasing process. And if we don't have a policy, we don't know if we need one, because we don't know what the current process is.
Any other comments from council? But I'm going to need to go to the city manager, and maybe that will just take care of the question that the council members posed.
Sure. Hi, council. Javon Grogan, city manager. Council member Mason is correct. There was a request for this to be a strategic initiative that was not supported by the full city council. but staff did commit to providing the city council with information on our current purchasing practices, not our current local purchasing our local purchasing preference, because we don't have one, but on the current purchasing practices that the city performs, and that was stated under the guise of before the city council talks about potential changes to the city's purchasing practices. It would be beneficial to have some foundational information. Councilmember Mason is correct that that project was being worked on by a former finance director. We went through a period of several months with an interim finance director that was yours truly, the city manager doing dual role, as well as having contractors provide support. We do have a new finance director that has been with the city, I want to say approximately 4 months. I do not have a timing on that I can provide to the city council on when that report will be to you, but I will commit to providing an update on the schedule. City Attorney Mark Zaffarano, I see, has popped on and has some thoughts to share on this project, because it does involve significant legal review as well. And so I think he has additional information.
Only one part, given the late hour, and I can hardly call it that. So one thing for the city council to know is that local preferences must be supported by evidence that the cost for local businesses to operate in the community are higher than the cost for them to operate outside the community. So that's the legal requirement. That's actually under the federal Constitution. So I think that, sort of irrespective of the staff issue that Javon raised, I think it probably is not something that aspect of it is probably not something that the staff can do, and the staff would probably have to hire, an expert consultant or economist to assist with that analysis to determine if there's even a basis for it. Because if there's a local preference like that, it does have to be supported that way. Having said that, the city could certainly adopt something that isn't really a local preference, that just says we'd like to buy local whenever we can. So a non-binding, doesn't have any teeth to it, can't really be enforced. That would certainly be something to consider. But I think so we have to keep both of those in the hopper, depending on the results of whether at some later date the city council wants to allocate some funds for the consultant analysis.
Yeah, and I would just say that I don't, and I should have watched it right before the meeting, but I didn't have a chance. I don't believe that it's that council didn't support it. I think there was substantial support in supporting our local businesses. If I remember correctly, before we went around and asked everybody, we were asked to hold off and to give staff an opportunity to share what they're already doing. And then based on what's already being done, then we can assess whether we would ask for a local purchasing policy to be created. And so that's really what I'm getting at, is what are we doing so we can make a determination of whether we need to do more, whether we need to, and then at that point determine what that would take. So thank you.
Okay, let's go around the room once, and Councilmember Hamilton.
So I've talked about buy local a few times, but all before joining this body. So I'll just share what my thoughts are, and they're more in line with what the city attorney alluded to at the end there, with more of a non-binding, but still a policy that we try to adhere to, and that's that in order to support our local businesses, we just make sure that businesses that are based in San Bruno are given appropriate consideration when we need to purchase goods and services. And if the San Bruno option is competitive and appropriate, you go with the San Bruno option. Simple as that. So that's been my thought about this for a while. And I agree that getting into providing all the evidence and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure it's going to get way too complicated and legally murky. but if just to make sure that we're looking at San Bruno businesses and provide a reasonable assessment. If the San Bruno option is appropriate, then you go for it. That's it.
Vice Chair Medina.
Thank you. I recall the discussion and vaguely about, okay, we'll hold off on that and we'll come back and hear it. And understandably, with Keith DeMartini departing and the amount of work for our city manager, so that had to take a pause. And then with this latest part with our city attorney, yeah, we should try our best to buy local when we can, and that is justified. And so I don't know where to go from here without getting into the legal side of it. So everybody should try to buy local. Thank you.
If I may,
I think we're. Go ahead, City Chairman.
Just one other comment. I'm sorry. So even we'll just call it the soft policy of expressing that sentiment in some sort of policy or ordinance actually does have its own issues that we have to consider. So, for example, normally the purchasing policy says if we're buying, Post-its, we check with 3 vendors, perhaps including a local vendor, if there is a local vendor of Post-its, and determine what the unit price is, and we buy it from the least expensive vendor. So the issue is what happens if the San Bruno vendor is more expensive. And so I think that raises the question that we're going to have to deal with, even if the local preference that we express is not a binding preference, but perhaps puts the city council or staff in a position of either being encouraged to or being required to take an option that is more expensive than a different option. So those are all things that we would need to consider.
And just to go full circle, tonight, the purpose of tonight's was just asking for an update on when, where we are, when we're going to get the presentation on the current practices. And then, there's a number of cities that have local purchasing policies. So I'm just curious to know where we are on that, in that realm.
City Manager?
Yeah. I would just like to request clarification from council, if so directed. Is it would it be the direction of council that this is a item of high importance and should be brought to council as expeditiously as possible? And if that involves sort of balancing other workloads or strategic initiatives, that this is something of sort of high importance that has the full blessing of the city council to come back as soon as possible, knowing and recognizing that it has been a request for quite some time, but staff workload has
City
been.
Manager had asked, what's the council's wish?
Can I, would the council be allowing?
I don't know if you can hear me, or I'm having some technical problems.
We can hear you, Mayor Medina. City Manager Grogan is speaking.
Or would the direction of the city council be to allow the city manager and the professional staff to balance the strategic initiative, the work product that's already on the plate, and provide council with a timing on when this analysis can be provided? I just want to be clear. Sort of, is it a high priority? Get this sort of ASAP, or recognizing the prioritization of the existing workload items, just provide the city council with an estimated timing on when the analysis can be performed and brought back.
So I'm fine with the timeline if it could be presented to us so that we have an idea of when it's coming. And I do just want to be very, very clear. I'm not asking for an analysis that was never offered or requested. What's being requested is what is the city doing right now? So thank you.
Okay, are we all in concurrence? I see. Okay. All right. Oh, and council member, is there anything else that you wanted to add to comments for this evening?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that we acknowledged earlier the Fire Prevention Week, but I also wanted to acknowledge that September 12th was Police Women's Day, National Police Women's Day, and considering that we have a small number of women in our police force, congratulations to them and thank you for their service. And I love what San Mateo County Sheriff's Office did is they proclaimed it a week long of thanking the women who serve. So just congratulations and a thank you for their service, because I can imagine how difficult it is being a female police officer, much less a police officer today. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Next item, Marty Medina, code enforcement for vacant properties.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. So for many years, a number of vacant properties and storefronts have blighted our city. Many of these properties are along our major thoroughfares, along El Camino, San Bruno Avenue, and within our downtown. I have followed the process of using the San Bruno Responds app and have noticed no improvement in the most egregious properties. In fact, some of these properties are getting worse. In my discussions with the city manager, I understand code enforcement, like many departments, are short-staffed. I understand the council approved a budget. I understand life safety concerns are the top priority for code enforcement. However, something needs to be done. As a former San Bruno code enforcement officer, I know the road to compliance starts with providing notice to the property owner. Their properties are in an unacceptable condition, and there must be consequences for non-compliance. The compliance process is outlined in current San Bruno Municipal Code, Chapter 5.24, Maintenance of Distressed Vacant Properties. I'm asking my colleagues tonight for support to direct staff to address this problem. If staffing needs need to be increased, then a proposal can be provided to the council to amend the budget. Our community deserves better. We cannot allow this problem to continue. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Any comments from council? Councilmember Hamilton.
So I absolutely and completely agree. I think that's no surprise to anyone here. With just as a very, very quick anecdote, several years ago when walking downtown, I ended up stopping in front of a particular storefront that had a drooping banner and was in a complete state of disrepair. And I saw that it also had a notice on it from the previous year, telling them to clean it up, and it hadn't been done to that point. And that was actually the moment at which I thought maybe I should run for council. This was 2 years ago, and that property is identical to what it looked like that same day. Even the sign is drooping at the exact same angle. There hasn't been a living soul in that building in 2 years. I completely agree that something needs to be done. I understand that we have staffing issues. If we need to bring in temporary contract work and figure out how to pay for it budget-wise, we need to have a proposal brought before us so we can get something done. I agree with the vice mayor that enough is enough.
Okay, any council members, any comments from council members?
I just echo Councilmember Hamilton and Medina.
Anything else from my colleagues? Are you mad at me now? Okay, so, Mr. Vice Mayor, any final thoughts?
No, I laid it out. some of these properties are going to stay in that condition until they're given notice, and we have staffing problems that we don't have the staff to do it, so we need to bring on some temporary staff, or the direction is for staff to come back with a solution, and if it involves providing it money and amending the budget, then we do so.
Okay, Councilmember Salazar.
Thank you. So I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I do have concerns about the process because, you know, I mean, in these, you know, Councilmember Hamilton said, you know, seeing these dilapidated businesses helped him in his decision to run for council. When I first ran for office, I walked downtown and up and down San Bruno Avenue taking pictures of empty storefronts that were, you know, not being kept up. And some of them have come back and then fallen back into disrepair. And it's absolutely because we don't have the resources to stay on top of the businesses. And sadly, the property owners aren't, you know, doing their fair share to keep the properties up. But like I started saying, you know, my concern is more with the process in that, you know, we've approved a budget and we've kind of made some priorities, and you know, there are appropriate times in the budget cycle where we're going to come back and revisit our priorities and decide. But I don't think it's a good use of staff's time if we like just keep throwing these things out there, reprioritizing, throwing new work orders in. I mean, we know we have a lot of vacancies that we need to fill, and we also know that we have no money to pay for those. And so, you know, really my concern is not so much that these should be prioritized, but rather, is this really, you know, in between these cycles, really the appropriate time to bring these up and to ask staff to halt what they're doing and then bring us back a reprioritization of things that are already in progress? Or would it be better to wait until we get our next update, when we do get those regularly, and then say at that point, okay, look, you're not making enough progress on this, forget about that one, let's reprioritize and look at that. So, you know, it's more of a process thing. I want to make sure that we're, you know, not having staff chase their tails.
City Manager.
Yeah, I'd like to ask for the police chief to be brought in the room as a panelist to offer some comments about code enforcement that is within the police department, because notices have been given to a number of businesses. But I think it's important to note that this is not simply a code enforcement issue or a city resource issue with having enough code enforcement officers. It is a much, much larger problem, largely more economic development than code enforcement. There's an existing project on the police department's work program to identify what additional tools in the toolbox may be needed. But the concept that it's simply a staffing issue, and if more time was spent, that there would be a different treatment of how private property owners keep their businesses. There's actually more tools that are needed in the toolbox, and with the current staffing that we have, it is important to have an understanding of the workload, and as well as the life safety issues that take precedent. So with that, I'll invite the police chief to make some comments, but absolutely we will take direction from council and move forward.
Thank you, City Manager Grogan. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Ryan Johansson, your chief of police. Just some brief comments on this topic. I think the first is that I can commit to getting an update to the city manager in relatively short order regarding the steps that are already being taken by our existing code enforcement officer with many of these properties. I think it's a little bit of a misconception to believe that nothing's being done with them. I met with him as recently as last week, and I know that many of these properties are not only on his radar, but he's already been meeting with the responsible business owners and having communications with them. In addition to that, I think it's important to understand that his priorities at this point in time are that he kind of inherited a very, very large backlog of cases, as we've talked about numerous times. His first priority day to day right now is the incoming complaints. And of course, those are triaged using many of the methods that have already been discussed here, in an effort to ensure that we don't create a new backlog. The old backlog, many of them are very, very old cases that can be dispositioned relatively quickly. And he doesn't want to allow a large new caseload to build up while we're down 50% of the staff in that division. So he spends the bulk of his time dealing with the new incoming complaints day to day to ensure we don't create a new backlog. Then his second priority has been the backlog and trying to figure out which complaints can simply be gotten rid of because they no longer exist and which ones require some immediate attention. However, when I met with him and his supervisor last week, one of the things we discussed is that one of our aims in bringing them to the police department was to create some proactive efforts in code enforcement that's very culturally consistent with what we do at the police department. And we felt that was an area where we could help by bringing them under our umbrella. And I expressed my desire to ensure that that became a part of his weekly routine, even if it meant that there was some sacrifice in the previously two identified priority areas. And so in the coming weeks, we will be moving to allowing 1 day a week where Robert is able to really focus his time on the things that are obvious to him and to you. And San Mateo Avenue is at the very top of his list when I simply ask him, where would you spend that time if you had it immediately? So there will, in the immediate future, be some more focus in the areas that have concern has been expressed tonight. And then kind of to reiterate, I know that City Manager Grogan had already asked me about how long it would take to put together an update on some of these properties so that he could share that with you all. And I'll commit to getting that done during the remainder of this week.
Thank you. Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you for that update, Chief. I just want to make clear that nobody this evening implied that nothing is being done. So, I mean, and your description of how things are being approached now, we know that we have a code enforcement officer, and we know that he is working, that he inherited a massive backlog and is working very hard. It's just right now we don't feel that that's enough. And your explanation for like that one building that I brought up in my anecdote, well, that makes perfect sense. If that one's been on the list for a long, long time, but right now we're focusing on not letting the list grow. So that completely explains it. So I appreciate that. But this is a quality of life issue and something that I feel that we need to address, and that's why I'm so passionate in supporting this. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Councilmember Salazar.
Are we moving on to another topic or still on the topic of code enforcement?
Well, if we're done with code enforcement, I would go back to Councilmember Medina to see if we're making it.
Okay, so I have nothing more on code enforcement.
Vice Mayor, anything?
A little hard to hear you, Mayor, but I believe the council provided direction to our city manager, and it was great to hear a semi-update or an update from our chief. That's definitely appreciated. Thank you.
And Vice Mayor, is there anything else for you on council comments?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Is there Councilmember Salazar, anything for you this evening?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so I know it's almost midnight, so I will keep my comments brief. And I just wanted to throw out some closing thoughts based on a conversation that we had earlier, because these things have been rattling around in my head during the meeting. And so not for the sake of debate or anything, but I just wanted to throw a few little nuggets out there for food for thought. And regarding COVID-19, what I keep hearing in the press, that the World Health Organization and the CDC and infectious disease experts can't even agree on what best approaches should be. We keep hearing terms like variants. The disease keeps changing. The efficacy rates of the of the shots that we're getting are, not 100%. There's debate about whether or not we need booster shots. And then there's, of course, the infamous breakthrough cases of people that have been vaccinated and still come down with illness. So, not even a year ago, we were hearing about 60 to 70% vaccination rate would get us to herd immunity. And here we are at 90%, and people are still getting very sick. And so I bring up those issues because, I don't think that the science is simple. And I don't think that there is an easy answer or a silver bullet. And the city manager alluded to the fact that it's a changing environment, and our staff has had to respond to those things. And so I'm absolutely confident that each one of us here on the council brings 100% to this thing. And I can say emphatically that in 10 years on this council, I have never shirked on my duties knowingly. And, I bring 100%, but I'm not an expert on everything. And in fact, I think one of our most important duties on the council is that we do hire people that know more than we do, and have it's their full-time responsibility to be informed, to attend the briefings, and to make those decisions that we as part-time lawmakers don't really have the time to do. Most of us have full-time jobs. We have families to raise. And so we don't have that level of commitment that our professional staff does. And so, the point there being that, if members of the public think that we should know as much or more than our staff, I have to wholeheartedly disagree with that. And I think that if we're not hiring people that knew more than us, then that would be the egregious dereliction of our duty. And so we do have to put our faith in them. And if they're not doing their job, then it's our job to remove them. But I do not see any evidence that they are not doing their job. And so I just wanted to close with that. So thank you for indulging me.
Thank you. Anything from you, Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes, very briefly, just want to remind everyone that the application deadline for the San Bruno Community Foundation Board is this coming Friday, September 17th at 5:00 p.m. This is an excellent opportunity to get involved and have a voice in the community. There's a brochure with all the details on the city website at sanbruno.ca.gov/SBCF board. So please apply if you are interested. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to get us done before midnight, so I'm going to adjourn this meeting to the next regular city council meeting, which will be held on September the 28th, 2021 at 7 o'clock. Thank you, and good night and good morning.